The first time Marcus saw her, she was curled up in the corner of his grandfather's barn, buried beneath a pile of hay like some wounded animal seeking shelter. November rain hammered against the tin roof, creating a symphony of desperation that matched the look in her eyes when they met his. She didn't scream or run. She just stared at him with the hollow gaze of someone who had already lost everything worth protecting. Her name was Elena, though he wouldn't learn that until much later. In that moment, she was just a trembling figure in torn jeans and a jacket 3 sizes too big, clutching a backpack that looked as empty as her expression. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his hand still on the light switch, rain dripping from his hair onto the concrete floor. He had come to check on the horses before the storm worsened, never expecting to find a person living in the space between the hay bales and forgotten farm equipment. "Please," she whispered, and that single word carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "Please don't call the police." Marcus should have called them anyway. That's what any reasonable person would do when finding a stranger trespassing on private property. But there was something about the way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained even while begging, that told him she wasn't dangerous. She was terrified. Of him, of the world outside, of whatever had driven her to choose sleeping on hay over anything civilization had to offer. He made a decision that would change both their lives. "When did you last eat?" he asked instead. The question seemed to surprise her more than his presence had. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if she'd forgotten how to answer simple questions about basic human needs. "I don't." "Tuesday, maybe? What day is it now?" "Friday." Marcus stepped further into the barn, moving slowly like he was approaching a wild deer. "Stay here. I'll bring you something." "Why?" The suspicion in her voice was sharp enough to cut. "What do you want?" "Nothing," he said honestly. "You're cold and hungry and hiding in my grandfather's barn during a storm. That's reason enough." He left before she could protest, jogging through the rain back to the main house where his grandfather sat watching the Weather Channel, oblivious to their unexpected guest. Marcus grabbed bread, cheese, some leftover chicken from dinner, and a thermos of hot coffee. He added a blanket from the hall closet, one of the thick wool ones his grandmother had made before she passed. When he returned, Elena hadn't moved. She watched him set the food on an overturned crate with the wariness of someone who had learned that kindness always came with a price tag. "Eat," he said simply. "We'll talk after." She fell on the food like she was drowning and it was air. Marcus looked away, giving her privacy in her desperation, pretending to check on the horses in their stalls. Thunder rolled across the sky, and somewhere in the distance, lightning split the darkness. Inside the barn, the only sounds were rain, horses shifting in their sleep, and the quiet, desperate sounds of someone remembering what it felt like to be human. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice stronger now, fed by more than just food. "You didn't have to do that." Marcus turned back to face her. She had wrapped herself in the blanket, looking slightly less like a ghost and more like a person. "How long have you been sleeping here?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. I lose track." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I move around during the day, come back at night. I've been careful. I didn't think anyone would notice. My grandfather doesn't come out here much anymore. Bad knees." Marcus leaned against the wall, maintaining that careful distance. "But I do. I should have seen signs of you sooner." "I'm good at being invisible," Elena said, and something in her tone suggested this was a skill learned through necessity, not choice. The rain showed no signs of stopping. Marcus knew he was standing at a crossroads, the kind that only appears a few times in a person's life. He could walk away, let her finish the food and disappear into the night like she clearly wanted to. Or he could step forward into the unknown. "You can't stay in the barn," he said finally. "Not like this. Not through winter." Fear flashed across her face. "I'll leave. I'm sorry. I'll go right now." "That's not what I meant." Marcus took a breath. "Come up to the house. We have a spare room." Elena laughed, a broken sound with no humor in it. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous." "Could be," Marcus agreed. "But I don't think you are. And even if I'm wrong, I'd rather take that risk than let someone freeze to death 50 yards from my door." She studied him for a long moment, searching for the trap, the angle, the hidden cost. When she didn't find it, something in her expression cracked, just slightly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because someone should have done it sooner," Marcus said quietly. "Before you ended up choosing hay over the cold." Elena didn't accept his offer that night. She thanked him for the food, returned the blanket, and politely insisted she would be fine in the barn. Marcus didn't push. He'd learned from years of working with traumatized horses that trust couldn't be forced, only offered and accepted in its own time. So he left her there, but he came back the next morning with breakfast, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Each day, she seemed a little less like a shadow and a little more like a person. She told him small things, carefully selected details that revealed nothing important. She was 26. She liked her coffee black. She used to work in a library before everything fell apart. She didn't talk about what everything meant, and Marcus didn't ask. Not yet. His grandfather, Thomas, noticed the missing food on the third day. Marcus had expected anger or concern, but the old man just nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. "The barn girl," he said, surprising Marcus completely. "I've seen her." "Figured you had too." "You knew?" Marcus stared at him. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you?" Thomas countered, pouring himself more coffee. "Some people need space to find their footing. Pushing them just makes them run faster. Your grandmother taught me that, and life taught her." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Bring her to dinner tonight. 6 o'clock. Tell her it's not a request from me, it's an invitation from Rose." Marcus didn't understand until he saw the photograph his grandfather pulled from his wallet. A young woman with dark hair and uncertain eyes, standing in front of the same barn where Elena now slept. The photo was dated 1967. "Your grandmother," Thomas said softly, "spent 2 months in that barn before she trusted me enough to come inside. Some stories repeat themselves because they are meant to." That evening, Marcus found Elena sorting through her backpack with the systematic precision of someone who owned so little that every item mattered. "My grandfather wants you to come to dinner," he said without preamble. "He knows you're here. He's known for a while." Elena's hand stilled. "I'll leave tonight." He was married to a woman who once lived in this barn too. She was running from something, just like you. He helped her, and 50 years later, he wants to help you. Not because you owe him anything, but because someone helped her once, and that's how this works. The story seemed to surprise her more than anything else Marcus had said. "Your grandmother lived here? In the barn?" "For 2 months, apparently. I never knew. She died when I was 12. Marcus sat down on a hay bale, the evening light filtering through the cracks in the walls. "His making pot roast. Said it was her favorite. Said she was scared too, but she took the chance, and it saved her life." "What was she running from?" Elena asked quietly. "He didn't say. But I think that's the point. It doesn't matter what you're running from. What matters is whether you're ready to stop running." Elena was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the worn strap of her backpack. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I had a husband. He seemed perfect at first. Charming, successful, attentive. By the time I realized what he really was, I was so tangled up in his world that I couldn't see the exits anymore." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he kept his expression neutral, letting her continue at her own pace. "He controlled everything. My phone, my money, my friends. When I tried to leave the first time, he found me in 3 days. The second time, 2 days. He had connections, resources, ways of tracking me that I didn't understand." Her voice remained steady, clinical, as if she was describing something that happened to someone else. "The third time, I got smart. I destroyed everything electronic, took only cash, changed my appearance, traveled randomly. I've been moving for 8 months. This is the longest I've stayed anywhere." "Is he still looking?" Marcus asked. "People like him don't stop. They see it as a challenge, a game they have to win. But I got better at hiding than he was at seeking. Eventually, I think I just became too much work." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than fear in her eyes. "Or maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe he'll show up tomorrow and drag me back, and all of this will have been just another mistake." "He won't drag you anywhere," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "Not from here." Elena laughed, that same broken sound he'd heard before. "You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of." "No, but I know what I'm capable of. And my grandfather served 2 tours in Vietnam before he came back here to farm. And Sheriff Morrison grew up on the property next door. We're not the city, where you can disappear and no one notices. Out here, we notice everything, and we protect our own." "I'm not your own. I'm nobody. You're someone who's been eating breakfast with me for 6 days. Someone who fixed the loose board on Thunderstall without being asked. Someone my grandfather invited to dinner because you remind him of the woman he loved for 50 years. Marcus stood up, brushing hay from his jeans. Come to dinner, Elena. Even if it's just this once. Even if you leave tomorrow. Let someone choose you, just for tonight. Those last words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. I don't know how to believe that someone would just help without wanting something back. Then don't believe it yet. Just come to dinner. Marcus offered his hand, palm up, an invitation without pressure. Your grandmother's pot roast is apparently legendary. Seems wrong to let it go to waste. Elena looked at his hand for a long moment, and Marcus could see the war happening behind her eyes. Every instinct she'd honed over 8 months of survival screamed at her to refuse, to maintain her isolation, to stay safe in the known dangers rather than risk the unknown. But there was another part of her, quieter but still alive, that remembered what it felt like to sit at a table with other people, to be seen as human instead of prey. She took his hand. The walk from the barn to the house was only 50 yards, but Marcus knew it represented a journey of miles for her. She kept glancing back over her shoulder, her body tense and ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But when they stepped through the door and the warmth of the house enveloped them, when Thomas looked up from setting the table and smiled at her with grandfatherly kindness, something in her posture shifted. Elena, Thomas said, as if her name was the most natural thing in the world for him to know. Welcome. Rose would be happy to know someone else found shelter here. And for the first time since Marcus had met her, Elena smiled. It was small and tentative, like something fragile learning to unfold in sunlight, but it was real. She had chosen the hay over the cold. But tonight, someone had chosen her over indifference. 3 weeks passed like a dream Elena was afraid to wake from. She moved into the spare room, a small space with faded floral wallpaper and a window overlooking the fields. Thomas treated her with the gentle respect of someone who understood boundaries, never asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Marcus brought her coffee every morning, black with no sugar, exactly how she liked it. She started helping around the farm, feeding chickens, mending fences, finding purpose in the simple rhythm of physical work. For the first time in years, Elena began to remember what peace felt like. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, a black Mercedes pulled up the gravel driveway. Elena was in the kitchen making lunch when she heard the engine. The sound sent ice through her veins. She knew that purr, that specific combination of wealth and power. Her hands started shaking so badly she dropped the knife she'd been using to slice tomatoes. It clattered against the counter, impossibly loud in the sudden silence of her panic. Elena? Marcus appeared in the doorway, concern creasing his face. What's wrong? She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Her entire body had locked into a terror response that bypassed rational thought. Through the kitchen window, she watched a man step out of the Mercedes, tall and impeccably dressed, his movements carrying the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. David. That's him, she managed to whisper. That's my husband. Marcus moved faster than she'd ever seen him move, his hand gentle on her shoulder but his voice hard as steel. Go to the barn. Now. Hide in the back room behind the feed storage. Don't come out until I come get you. He'll hurt you, Elena said desperately. He'll hurt anyone who gets in his way. Let him try. Marcus was already moving toward the front door. Go. Now. Elena ran, her survival instincts finally overriding her paralysis. She fled through the back door, across the muddy yard, her feet barely touching the ground. Behind her, she heard the front door open, heard Marcus's voice raised in greeting, deceptively casual. She didn't stop until she was buried in the darkest corner of the barn, hidden behind 50-pound bags of horse feed, her hand pressed over her mouth to muffle her ragged breathing. At the house, David stood on the porch, his handsome features arranged in an expression of concerned confusion. Good afternoon, he said warmly, extending a hand that Marcus didn't take. I'm looking for my wife. Elena Richardson. I have reason to believe she might be in this area. Don't know anyone by that name, Marcus said flatly. This is private property. You should leave. David's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I understand your caution, but you don't understand the situation. My wife is ill. She suffers from severe delusions and paranoia. She ran away from treatment several months ago, and her family is desperate to find her and get her the help she needs. It was a good lie, Marcus realized. Polished and sympathetic, painting Elena as unstable and David as the concerned, loving husband. How many times had this story worked? How many people had believed it and handed Elena back to her abuser? Like I said, don't know her. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Marcus crossed his arms, planting himself firmly in the doorway. Time for you to go. I'm afraid I can't do that. David's voice remained pleasant, but the threat beneath it was clear. I've tracked her to this area through credit card activity and witness reports. I know she's been here. The law is on my side. She's my wife, and she needs medical intervention. Show me a warrant, Marcus said. Show me court papers, a police escort, anything official. Otherwise, you're just a man harassing strangers on their own property. I don't need a warrant to collect my own wife. David took a step forward, his polite mask slipping slightly. You're interfering in a family matter. That could have serious legal consequences. Could have, Thomas said from behind Marcus, his old shotgun cradled casually in his arms. He wasn't pointing it at David, but the implication was clear. But probably won't. See, out here, we take care of our own. And we don't take kindly to men who show up making threats. David's eyes narrowed, calculating odds and outcomes. He was used to intimidating isolated women and bureaucrats who followed procedure. 2 armed men on their own property, in a rural area where the sheriff was likely a friend, presented a different equation. This isn't over, David said, his pleasant tone completely gone now. I will find her. And when I do, everyone who helped her hide will face consequences. Looking forward to it, Thomas said mildly. Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing and act accordingly. David held his ground for another moment, his gaze promising retribution, before turning and walking back to his Mercedes. The engine roared to life, and gravel sprayed as he accelerated down the driveway, too fast and too angry to maintain his careful composure. Marcus and Thomas waited until the car disappeared from sight before lowering their guard. He'll be back, Thomas said quietly. Men like that always come back. I know. Marcus was already moving toward the barn. We need to call Morrison. Get this on record. In the barn, Elena remained frozen in her hiding place, listening to her heartbeat thunder in her ears. When Marcus finally found her, she was crying silently, her whole body shaking with the effort of holding in the screams. He's gone, Marcus said gently, kneeling beside her. He's gone, and he didn't see you. He knows I'm here, Elena said through her tears. He knows, and he won't stop. You should make me leave. Before he hurts you or Thomas. Before this gets worse. We're not making you do anything, Marcus said firmly. This is your choice, Elena. Always your choice. But if you want to stay, if you want to fight, we'll fight with you. You don't understand what you're up against. He has money, lawyers, connections. He's made people disappear before. Not like me, I just ran. But people who crossed him, who got in his way. They lost jobs, reputations, everything. Her voice cracked. I can't ask you to risk that. You're not asking. We're choosing. Marcus took her hands in his, steady and warm against her ice-cold fingers. He came here thinking he could intimidate us into giving you up. Instead, he showed us exactly who he is. Now we know what we're dealing with, and we can prepare. Prepare how? Elena looked at him with desperate hope and crushing doubt warring in her eyes. How do you fight someone like him? The same way you've been fighting him for 8 months, Marcus said. By refusing to give up. By finding people who believe you. By making him work for every inch until it costs him more than he's willing to pay. He helped her to her feet, brushing hay from her hair with gentle fingers. Come on. We're going to call Sheriff Morrison, file a report about the harassment, and start building a paper trail. We're going to do this the right way. The right way doesn't work against men like David, Elena said bitterly. The system protects them. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged. But you're not alone in the system anymore. That changes things. As they walked back to the house, Elena felt the fragile peace she'd built over 3 weeks crumbling around her. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. David had found her. But for the first time, she wasn't facing him alone. And that made all the difference. Sheriff Kate Morrison sat at Thomas's kitchen table, her uniform crisp and her expression serious as she took notes. She'd known Thomas her whole life, had learned to ride horses in his barn when she was 10 years old. When Marcus called her about the situation, she'd arrived within 20 minutes. Here's the problem, Morrison said after Elena finished her statement. Legally, he hasn't done anything wrong yet. Showing up on private property, asking questions, that's not illegal. The fact that he left when asked actually works in his favor. Elena's face fell, the hope that had been building crumbling back into resignation. So there's nothing you can do. I didn't say that. Morrison leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused. I said he hasn't done anything illegal yet. But we're going to make sure we're ready when he tries. Because men like your husband always try. She pulled out a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. I did some checking after Marcus called. David Richardson, CEO of Richardson Financial Group, board member of 3 charities, generous political donor. On paper, he's a pillar of the community. He's good at appearances, Elena said quietly. That's how he gets away with it. Except he hasn't been as careful as he thinks, Morrison continued. I made some calls to colleagues in other jurisdictions. You're not the first woman to disappear from his orbit. 4 other women in the past 10 years filed restraining orders against him, then dropped them within weeks. 3 employees filed harassment complaints that were settled out of court with NDAs attached. There's a pattern here, even if nothing stuck. Marcus felt anger burn hot in his chest. 4 other women? And nobody connected the dots. Different cities, different departments, expensive lawyers making things go away, Morrison said grimly. But now we're connecting them. I'm building a case file, coordinating with other departments. When he makes his move, and he will, we'll be ready. What do I do until then? Elena asked. Just wait for him to come back. You document everything, Morrison said. Every phone call, every sighting, every interaction. We build a harassment case so solid that no amount of money can make it disappear. She pulled out a small device, sliding it across the table. This is a panic button. You press it, and it sends an immediate alert to my phone and the station. Response time to this location is 7 minutes. You'll have help fast. Elena picked up the device, turning it over in her hands. It was small, innocuous, but it represented something she'd never had before, a safety net, a cavalry that might actually come. Over the next week, David's presence became a constant shadow over the farm. He never came back in person, but his influence was everywhere. A black SUV appeared on the road bordering the property, watching. Private investigators started asking questions in town, offering money for information about Elena's whereabouts. David's lawyers sent a letter to Thomas, threatening legal action for harboring a fugitive wife who was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. Marcus watched Elena withdraw into herself again, the progress she'd made eroding under the constant pressure. She stopped sleeping properly, jumping at every sound, checking the windows compulsively. The woman who had started to laugh at Thomas's terrible jokes and hum while she worked was disappearing back into survival mode. We need to go on the offensive, Marcus said one evening after finding Elena standing guard by the window at 2 in the morning. We can't just wait for him to wear us down. What did you have in mind? Thomas asked, surprising Marcus by being awake too, sitting in his recliner in the dark living room. Publicity, Marcus said. David's power comes from operating in the shadows, making problems disappear quietly. What if we drag everything into the light? Elena shook her head vehemently. No. You don't understand. He'll destroy you. He has journalists on his payroll, lawyers who can tie you up in defamation suits for years. Going public is exactly what he wants. It gives him more ways to hurt everyone around me. Or it gives us leverage, Marcus countered. Morrison said there are 4 other women with similar stories. What if they are willing to come forward together? What if this becomes bigger than just you? They won't, Elena said bitterly. They settled with NDAs. They can't talk without losing everything. NDAs don't cover criminal activity, Morrison said, appearing in the doorway. She'd taken to doing random check-ins at odd hours, part of the protective net they'd built around Elena. And if we can prove a pattern of abuse, stalking, and harassment, those agreements might not hold up. I've been reaching out to those women. 2 of them are willing to talk, off the record for now. They're scared, but they're tired of being scared. The conversation continued late into the night, plans forming and reforming as they tried to find the angle that would work. Elena listened but contributed little, her faith in systems and justice too broken to rebuild easily. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 days later, a woman named Jennifer Chen walked into Morrison's office with a box of documents. She'd been David's executive assistant for 5 years before she resigned abruptly and moved across the country. She'd signed an NDA, accepted a settlement, and tried to forget. But when she heard through Morrison's inquiries that David was stalking another woman, something in her snapped. I kept copies, Jennifer said, sliding the box across Morrison's desk. Every inappropriate email, every instance of him using company resources to track employees' personal lives, every time he had IT monitor someone's computer or phone. I kept it all because I knew someday someone would need it. Morrison went through the documents with the focus of a hunter who'd just found the trail. What she found was damning: systematic surveillance, intimidation tactics disguised as corporate policy, a pattern of behavior that crossed every legal and ethical line. Combined with the testimonies from 2 other women willing to come forward in Elena's statement, they had something real. "We can bring charges," Morrison said at the emergency meeting she called that night. "Multiple charges. Stalking, harassment, illegal surveillance. The DA is interested. This is bigger than a domestic dispute now." Elena sat very still, processing the information. "If we do this, he'll fight back with everything he has." "Let him," Marcus said. "We're ready." "Are you?" Elena looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the determination in his face. "Because once this starts, there's no going back. He'll try to destroy you, your reputation, this farm. He'll dig up every mistake you've ever made and use it against you. Are you really ready for that?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "The question isn't whether I'm ready. It's whether you are. Because this isn't my fight or Morrison's fight or Jennifer's fight. It's yours. We can give you the tools and support, but you have to decide if you want to stop running and start fighting back." The room fell silent. Thomas, Morrison, Marcus, they all waited, understanding that this moment would define everything that came after. Elena had spent 8 months running, years before that surviving. Now she was being offered something different, the chance to stand and fight, with people who had chosen to stand with her. "I'm tired of being afraid," Elena said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm tired of him having all the power. If there's a chance to stop him, not just for me but for everyone else he might hurt, then yes. I'm ready." Morrison nodded, already pulling out her phone. "Then let's do this right. I'm calling the DA now." As Morrison stepped outside to make her calls, as Thomas went to put on coffee for what promised to be a long night, Marcus squeezed Elena's hand. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone in it." Elena squeezed back, and for the first time since David's Mercedes had appeared in the driveway, she felt something other than fear. She felt fury. Clean and bright and righteous, burning away the paralysis that had defined her life for too long. David had chosen to hunt her down, to never let her go. But she was choosing to fight back. And this time, she had an army. The legal battle that followed was everything Elena had feared and nothing like she'd expected. David's lawyers descended like well-dressed vultures, filing motions and countersuits, trying to bury the case in procedural warfare. They painted Elena as mentally unstable, Jennifer Chen as a disgruntled employee, Morrison as a small-town sheriff with delusions of grandeur. The media, initially sympathetic, began running both sides pieces that questioned whether this was really abuse or just a bitter divorce. But something unexpected happened. The more David fought, the more evidence surfaced. Former employees, emboldened by Jennifer's courage, came forward with their own stories. A forensic accountant discovered that David had been using company funds to hire private investigators to track multiple women. Security footage from various locations showed him following Elena during her 8 months on the run, proving that his claim of just wanting to help his sick wife was a calculated lie. The turning point came during a deposition where David, so used to controlling every narrative, made the mistake of letting his mask slip. When questioned about the security footage, he'd smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Of course I tracked her. She's my wife. She belongs to me." That single sentence, recorded and transcribed, became the smoking gun. It revealed the truth beneath all the polish and pretense. David Richardson didn't see Elena as a person but as property. And that changed everything. The criminal charges moved forward. David was arrested on multiple counts of stalking, harassment, and illegal surveillance. His company's board, facing their own legal exposure, asked for his resignation. The carefully constructed empire he'd built began to crumble, not from the outside, but from the weight of its own corruption. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, wasn't the real story. The real story was happening on a farm in rural Virginia, where a woman who had chosen hay over the cold was learning to choose herself. Elena started therapy, working through years of trauma with a counselor who specialized in domestic abuse. The sessions were brutal, forcing her to confront not just what David had done to her, but how she'd lost herself long before she ran. The woman she'd been, confident, ambitious, full of dreams, had been systematically dismantled until running and hiding felt like the only skills she had left. Who were you before him? Her therapist asked one day. Elena had to think about it, reaching back through years of fear to remember. I wanted to be a librarian, she said finally. I loved organizing information, helping people find what they needed. I loved the quiet, the order, the feeling that I was connecting people with knowledge that could change their lives. And what do you want now? That was the harder question. For so long, survival had been her only goal. But now, with David facing trial and unable to come near her, with a restraining order that actually meant something in people who enforced it, Elena had to figure out what came after survival. She started small. She began cataloging Thomas's extensive collection of farming books and journals, organizing decades of accumulated knowledge. She created a system, developed an index, found joy in the familiar work of bringing order to chaos. Thomas, delighted, started calling her the farm librarian, and somehow the title stuck. Marcus watched her transformation with quiet amazement. The frightened woman he'd found in the barn was still there, still emerged during thunderstorms or when unexpected cars appeared on the road. But she was being joined by someone else, the person Elena was choosing to become. They grew closer slowly, carefully, both aware of the complications and the timing. Marcus didn't push, didn't demand anything, just showed up every morning with coffee and conversation. He taught her to ride horses, laughing when she fell off and helping her back up. She taught him about cataloging systems and the Dewey Decimal System, making him laugh with stories about eccentric library patrons from her previous life. I'm not ready, Elena told him one evening in early spring, 6 months after David's arrest. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. For anything romantic, I mean. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Okay, Marcus said simply. That's it? Just okay? What did you want me to say? Marcus looked at her with those steady eyes that had never demanded anything she wasn't ready to give. Elena, I'm not waiting for you to be ready for some relationship I've got planned in my head. I'm just here because I choose to be here. Because I like talking to you about books and watching you get excited about reorganizing the tack room. Because you make my grandfather laugh and you fixed the barn cat's broken leg when everyone else said she was too feral to help. I don't know how to be a person yet, Elena said quietly. Not a whole person. I'm still putting the pieces back together. Then let me hand you some pieces when you drop them, Marcus said. That's all I'm offering. No expectations, no timeline, no agenda. Just friendship, if you want it. Everything else can figure itself out when you're ready, if you're ever ready. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd cried in the barn. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of being seen and accepted exactly as she was. The trial came and went. David was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 18 months in prison, with restraining orders extending well beyond his release. It wasn't enough, nothing would ever feel like enough, but it was something. It was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but real. On the day of the sentencing, Elena didn't go to the courthouse. She stayed at the farm, working in the garden she'd started planting. Morrison called with the verdict, and Elena listened, felt the relief wash over her, and then went back to her tomatoes. The end of David's power over her wasn't happening in a courtroom. It was happening here, in the dirt under her fingernails and the sun on her face and the choice to plant seeds for a future she was beginning to believe in. A year after Marcus found her in the barn, Elena stood in that same space, transformed now into a proper library. Thomas's books lined new shelves, organized and catalogued with professional precision. A reading chair sat by the window, and a small desk held Elena's laptop where she'd started taking online courses to finish her librarian certification. It's perfect, Thomas said, looking around with wonder. Rose would have loved this. Tell me about her, Elena said, sitting down in the reading chair and gesturing for Thomas to take the other. You said she lived in the barn too. I want to know her story. Thomas settled into the chair with the careful movements of age, his eyes growing distant with memory. Rose showed up in the summer of 1967, running from a father who thought his fists could teach obedience. She was 19, stubborn as hell, and she trusted no one. He smiled softly. Especially not some farm boy who kept bringing her food and talking about the weather. How did you convince her to stay? Elena asked. I didn't convince her of anything. That was the secret. Thomas leaned back, his weathered hands folded in his lap. I just showed up every day and proved that my word meant something. When I said she was safe, I made sure she was safe. When I said I wouldn't tell anyone where she was, I kept that promise even when her father came looking with the sheriff. Eventually, she started to believe that not everyone was waiting to hurt her. Did she ever go back? Try to reconcile with her family? No. Some bridges burn for a reason, and you don't rebuild them just because people expect you to. Rose built a new family here, me, this farm, eventually Marcus's mother, then Marcus. Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. She used to say that the barn saved her life, but it was choosing to leave the barn that let her start living it. Elena understood the distinction. Safety and healing weren't the same thing. The barn had given her survival, but it was the house, the people, the choice to stop hiding that was giving her something more. I've been accepted to a graduate program, Elena said suddenly. Library science, online with some residency requirements. I got the acceptance letter this morning. Thomas's face split into a genuine smile. That's wonderful, Elena. Truly. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if I can't do it? What if I've been broken too long to put back together properly? You've already done the hardest part, Thomas said gently. You survived. Everything after that is just details. Marcus appeared in the doorway, knocking on the frame even though the door was open. Am I interrupting? Never, Elena said, and meant it. Over the past year, Marcus had become her constant, not in a possessive way, but in the way the sun was constant, reliably there whether she looked at it or not. I have something for you, Marcus said, holding out a small wrapped package. Early graduation present, even though you're just starting. Elena unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover. Inside the front page, Marcus had written a single line, for the woman who chose herself. Something in Elena's chest cracked open, not with pain but with possibility. She looked up at Marcus, really looked at him, seeing not just the man who'd found her in the barn but the person who'd stood beside her through everything after. Who'd never asked for anything except the chance to keep standing there. I'm still not ready, she said softly, honestly. But I'm getting there. And when I am, if you're still here. I'll be here, Marcus said simply. No rush. No pressure. Just here. 2 years later, Elena stood in front of a small library in the nearby town, holding the keys to the building. The previous librarian had retired, and the position had opened up just as Elena completed her degree. It felt like fate, though Elena had learned to call it choice instead. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of books and possibility. Behind her, Marcus waited on the sidewalk, giving her this moment of triumph alone. Thomas sat in the truck, his health declining but his spirit still fierce, determined to see Elena's first day. The library needed work, new shelves, updated computers, a children's section that was stuck somewhere in 1985. But Elena saw past the worn carpet and outdated fixtures to what it could become. A place where people could find not just books, but answers. Safety. Hope. The things she'd found in a barn that had led her here. That evening, back at the farm, they celebrated with Thomas's attempt at cake and Marcus's actually decent grilling. As the sun set and the first stars appeared, Elena realized she couldn't remember the last time she checked over her shoulder or jumped at unexpected sounds. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive for so long had finally, slowly, begun to ease. What are you thinking? Marcus asked, sitting beside her on the porch steps. That I'm happy, Elena said, testing the words. They felt foreign and familiar at once, like a language she'd once spoken fluently and was learning again. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good, Marcus said, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the darkness settle over the fields. 3 years after Marcus found her in the barn, Elena woke up in the farmhouse she now called home. Not in the guest room anymore, but in a space she'd decorated herself, with bookshelves and plants and photographs of people who'd become her chosen family. She was still healing, probably would be forever, but she was also living. That morning, she drove to work at her library, where teenagers came to do homework and elderly residents attended book clubs and young parents brought children for story time. She'd built something here, something that mattered, something that was entirely hers. And that evening, when Marcus asked if she wanted to go to dinner, just the two of them, Elena said yes. Not because she had to, not because anyone expected it, but because she wanted to. Because she was ready. Because after choosing survival, after choosing safety, after choosing healing, she was finally ready to choose joy. They went to a small Italian restaurant in town, nothing fancy, and talked about books and horses and whether Thomas should really be trying to fix the tractor himself at his age. It was ordinary and perfect, and when Marcus walked her to her door and asked if he could kiss her, Elena said yes to that too. The kiss was soft and careful and asked nothing more than she wanted to give. When it ended, Elena didn't feel panic or fear. She felt possibility. I love you, Marcus said quietly. I've loved you since the barn, maybe. But you don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel anything you don't feel. I just wanted you to know. Elena smiled, the expression coming easier now than it once had. I'm not there yet, she said honestly. But I'm close. And that's something I never thought I'd be able to say to anyone. That's more than enough, Marcus said. 5 years after choosing the hay over the cold, Elena stood in the barn-turned library, conducting a workshop for women leaving domestic violence situations. She taught them about resources, safety planning, legal rights, all the things she'd wish she'd known. But more than that, she showed them that survival was possible, that healing was real, that the person they'd been before the abuse wasn't lost forever. After the workshop, a young woman approached her hesitantly. How did you do it? She asked. How did you get from there to here? Elena thought about the question, about the long journey from that first terrified night in the barn to this moment of purpose and peace. Someone chose me when I couldn't choose myself, she said finally. And that gave me time to remember who I was. Then I started choosing myself, every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And now? The woman asked. Now I choose joy, Elena said. I choose love. I choose a future I never thought I'd have. Not because it's easy, but because I can. Because I survived long enough to get that choice back. That night, Marcus proposed. Not with a grand gesture or public display, just the two of them on the porch where they'd shared countless conversations, under stars that had witnessed her entire transformation. Marry me, he said, holding a simple ring. Not because you need me, but because we choose each other. Every day, for the rest of our lives. Elena looked at the ring, at Marcus, at the farm that had saved her life and become her home. She thought about the woman she'd been, curled up in the hay, choosing cold isolation over dangerous connection. She thought about the woman she'd become, who ran a library and helped other survivors and had built a life worth living. Yes, she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Yes, I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. They married in the spring, in the barn where it all began, surrounded by people who had chosen her when she couldn't choose herself. Morrison was there, and Jennifer Chen, and some of the women from Elena's support groups. Thomas officiated, his voice strong despite his failing health, speaking of second chances and chosen families and love that heals. As Elena stood beside Marcus, exchanging vows she'd written herself, she thought about all the choices that had led her here. The choice to run. The choice to survive. The choice to trust. The choice to heal. The choice to love. She'd chosen the hay over the cold because cold was all she'd known. But Marcus had chosen her over indifference, and that choice had changed everything. It had given her time and space and safety to become someone who could make choices again. Now she chose joy. She chose love. She chose a future built not on fear but on possibility. And every morning, when Marcus brought her coffee, black with no sugar, exactly how she liked it, Elena chose him again. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because choosing love, after everything, was the bravest choice of all. The barn stood witness to it all, transformed from a hiding place into a sanctuary, from a symbol of survival into a celebration of healing. And sometimes, when Elena worked late in her library, organizing books and helping patrons, she would look out the window at that barn and remember the woman she'd been. She would remember, and she would be grateful, and she would choose herself all over again. Because that's what survival becomes when you're finally safe enough to stop running. It becomes living. And living, Elena had learned, was the sweetest choice of all.